Okay, we're all here. Good afternoon and welcome to this very special Inspire Salute to Israel and Jewish Communities Worldwide session. My name is Leah Garber and I'm Vice President and Director of JCC Association Center for Israel Engagement. I want to take a moment to thank the Marcus JCC CEO, Jared Powers, and a few key board members that are here with us today. Lee Katz, Board Chair, past Board Chair Stephen Cadranel, Margaret Marks, and our very own Lisa Brill, JCC Association Board Member. Thank you for inviting us to this beautiful community and this magnificent JCC. We are representing you with this beautiful artwork that comes from our centennial celebrations a few years ago. Lisa was back then chair of the Centennial Committee, and she was instrumental in creating this artwork, so thank you. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Israeli Consul General to the Southeast, Mrs. Anat Sultan Dadon, and Dylan Rice, Director of Jewish Community Affairs at the Consulate. Thank you both. Thank you both for being with us this afternoon and for the amazing work that under your leadership the Consul is doing here in Atlanta and in Southeast. This Mifgash Inspire presentation is, as you can imagine, particularly dear to me, as I'm sure to many, many of you here today. We are now launching JCC Association year-long Israel at 75 program. This milestone is significant for Israel and for every Jew worldwide. We share the pride of Israel reaching this historic moment as a sovereign, Jewish, and strong democratic state. The power of Israel draws from the strength and prosperity of Jewish communities worldwide and vice versa. Jewish communities here in North America and across the globe, together with all of us in Israel, form a magnificent, colorful mosaic that represents our beautiful and diverse people, living, thinking, and practicing Jewish values in very different ways, yet always united by our commitment to Jewish peoplehood and the Zionist vision. This afternoon will feature two aspects of this mosaic that complement each other. We will begin with a conversation between David Black, the Executive Director of the C. Jacobson JCC, and Professor Gil Troy. As Israel celebrates its 75th anniversary, David and Gil will actually look ahead at the next 25 years, when Israel will celebrate its centennial. Who as a people do we aspire to be? What does the future hold for the Jewish state? And for all of us here, what is the role of Jewish communities in North America in realizing this vision? Following what I know will be an inspiring and uplifting conversation, we will transition to recognizing, learning from, and expressing great gratitude to JCC leaders who play a significant role in dealing with crises created by the ongoing war in Ukraine. These two elements of the program represent the interconnectedness of Jewish life, from North America to Israel and the world. The strength of Jewish people, wherever they are, in Israel or the diaspora, is measured by the mutual care and support. This notion of shared responsibility, arvut adadit, the foundation of the Jewish state. It is our justification for being a people that survived, flourished, and thrived throughout history. Unlike more than 80 years ago, when the soil in Ukraine burned and Jews cried out for help, a cry lost in the horror of war, this time we heard the cry and we answered immediately. You answered immediately. Today, with a strong Jewish homeland and a strong Jewish diaspora, Jewish communities can and did respond to this calling, as they have been doing in the past, exactly today, 11 months, in so many inspiring ways. During this period of intense crisis, JCCs across the world have provided support in numerous forms, actively assisting community members within the war zone who are under fire, literally under fire, or the growing number of refugees who have fled Ukraine seeking for shelter. Leonard Petlock, the executive director of the Kings Bay Y, will be in conversation with Oksana from Ukraine, Marcel from Hungary, and Alex from New York. Incredible JCC leaders who will be sharing their truly inspiring and moving stories, demonstrating how JCCs are uniquely positioned to respond in times of social crisis. So with that, let's begin. And David, I gratefully hand this over to you.
So, first of all, Leah, the missives that you send out during every single month and the crisis that you explain to us have given comfort to thousands upon thousands of people. So I just want to applaud you for being able to be so clear and so beautiful in the way you describe what's taking place in Israel. As a point of personal privilege and gratitude, just a couple of mentions. One, the JCCA, since Doron has taken over, has done nothing but improve our movement. And since the pandemic, when we were all in absolute and total stress, the JCCA came through like no other organization in terms of leading us and guiding us to health and to the kind of prosperity that we're all dealing with today. So, Doron, I want to thank you. Second, Jared Powers, who you mentioned, I think I had the privilege of introducing you at a JCC Mifgash in 2016. This man is not only an intellect, but he's a doer, and he's a model for all of us to be able to take a look at and copy. So I want to thank Jared as well. Two other individuals. Smadar Barakiva, you are the face of international JCCs and international Jewry. Your ability to connect one of us to each other has enriched every single JCC in this country and around the world. Thank you. And lastly, I had the privilege of attending the Z3 conference that Zach Bodner has put forward. I know that he's now an author, unless like he's like, big shit now. But the fact of the matter is that what he is doing that enables American Jews and Israeli Jews to face each other and to understand each other is exactly what each one of us should be doing in our own community. So I don't know if Zach is here, but I want to just say thank you very much to you as well. The way this is going to go is very simple. I'm going to introduce a brilliant scholar. He's going to speak for 15 minutes. If he speaks for longer than 15 minutes, I'm going to come up on stage and make him uncomfortable. After that, we'll see about what kind of discussion we might get into for a little while, but the real meat and potatoes is going to be an exchange which I'm going to ask for all of you who have questions or that want to address a certain issue to come and do so as well. So without further ado, Professor Troy is a distinguished scholar of North American history at McGill University and an award-winning American presidential historian. Gil is a leading Zionist activist and the author of many books, including one that we've already gotten, Never Alone, Memoir Festo, as he calls it, of Natan Sharansky. The professor has published essays in the American, Canadian, and Israeli media. There's a lot more to say, but I don't want to cut into that 15 minutes, so I'd like you to please give a warm welcome to Professor Gil Troy.
Tzoram Tovim, Atlanta, the city too busy to hate. Something we could all learn from. So a few weeks ago, I returned from yet another trip to the States. I'm sitting in Jerusalem, I'm saying, oh my goodness, thank God. The next 2.5 months, no trips back and forth. And then Leah, the amazing Leah, says, Doron has a request. And I don't know if it's harder to say no to Leah Garber or to Doron Krakow. And it's not just because they're such amazing people. And it's not just because you want to please them. It's because they have this vision. They understand the power of J in JCC. They understand, and I've learned from them, that you aren't just executives, but you're educators, and you're ideologues, and you're leaders. And at this moment in time, at this moment in Jewish history, at this moment in Israeli history, it's more important than ever that you make an impact and that you show that we can, of course, make our opinions known. We can, of course, have difficult and uncomfortable dialogues about Israel and about Zionism and about Judaism and about where the Jewish people are going. But never, ever, ever let anyone rob us of our joy. Never, ever, ever let anyone rob us of the opportunity also to, as historians do, take the camera and zoom back and say, look how lucky we are to be living in 2023. Someone said to me, oh my goodness, at this point, I can't celebrate Israel's 75th. And I say we need to celebrate Israel's 75th now more than ever. And we need to do it in a way that both acknowledges Israel's historic accomplishments and also uses the 75th to lean into the values that we celebrate and to use it as a tool to push Israel to be the best Israel it can be and to make sure that we fulfill the Zionist dream. And think about it. We're living in this moment of what I'm calling the arc of Zionist triumph. In August, some of us were lucky enough to be in Basel and celebrate 125 years since Theodor Herzl got up and said, we are a people. We have the rights to a particular homeland. Doesn't preclude others from having rights to a homeland. And now I'm talking about Manhattan and $24 and the natives. And the rights to establish a state on that homeland. Think of where the Jewish people were 125 years ago. Think about 75 years ago, on November 29th, 1947. And people like to call that the anniversary of the partition plan. I call it the anniversary of the recognition on the part of the world that we are a people, we have the rights to a particular homeland, and the rights to establish a state on that homeland. And we're building up to Hei B'Iyar, which this year falls April 25th, April 26th, to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the State of Israel. So 125 years ago, we had the dream. 75 years ago, the dream was recognized. And 75 years from this spring, we're talking about the dream fulfilled and still being perfected. I am a Zionist because I am so proud of all the amazing work that's been done by generations before me. And I'm a Zionist because I know that I can't imagine a more effective tool for feeling rooted and connected and inspired and in love with my people. And I'm a Zionist because I know that there's still work to be done. But as a Zionist, I know that we don't throw up our hands, but we roll up our sleeves. When there's challenges out there, we take them on and we solve the problems one by one. But what should we be celebrating? Let's think of Zionism's 7 historic revolutions. First, it's already mentioned. Did you ever have the opportunity to watch an old person sing Hatikva? Someone who was born before the state was created? You look in their eyes and they understand the miracle that we take for granted, that our kids take for granted. In May 1948, there's a big debate. General George C. Marshall, one of the most legendary military figures in history, let alone American history, is telling Harry Truman, put pressure on the Jews, don't let them announce a state. And David Ben-Gurion is told, we have no weapons, we have no bullets, we have no oil, we have no ammunition. He says, yes, but we have Hatikva, the hope. But nevertheless, they have a debate. And they vote on May 14th, 1948, to declare the state. And Chaim Weizmann hears that and says, what took them so long, the idiots? We've been waiting for thousands of years. This is the moment. And we should celebrate that and appreciate that. Chaim Weizmann actually is, I think, one of the most underrated Zionist heroes of the past, who really kept the movement going between Herzl's sudden death at the age of 44 and David Ben-Gurion's emergence in the 1930s. Also has some of the greatest lines in Jewish history. During that little tiff in the Zionist Congress, the Sixth Zionist Congress over Uganda with Kenyan highlands, how central is Palestine to our vision? How central is Zion to Zionism? Chaim Weizmann is approached by a British lord who said in that delightfully British way of those days, well, we have so many other territories. Why don't you just pick another territory? And Chaim Weizmann said, where do you live? And he tells him where he lives. He says, where does your mother live? She says, 20 miles away. He goes, every Sunday you go 20 miles to visit your mother. Why don't you visit someone closer? Because she's ours. She's yours. Because Zionism is about identity. Zionism is about roots. And when Lord Balfour said, why do you need this place? Look, Jerusalem is a dump. And he said, Jerusalem was in its glory when London was a swamp. You wouldn't give up London. It's ours. It's who we are. It's about identity. The second miracle is a country of 600,000 when it's announced, which loses 1% of its people in the 48-49 war, absorbs another 600,000 people within 2 years and doubles its population, and then doubles its population again, and has been the welcome haven for Jews beaten up, oppressed, harassed, disrespected in so many corners of the world. From the Muslim countries and the Arab countries, to the Soviet Union, to Ethiopia. And third, we return the Jews to history. One of these days, somebody's going to write a fascinating doctoral dissertation about how it is that the most famous Israeli actress is Gal Gadot, Wonder Woman, playing with power. What does it mean to have a powerful Jew? What does it mean to understand that with power comes responsibility? What does it mean to no longer be the Nebushes of the world, the weaklings of the world, using our weakness as a moral platform to remain moral when we have power and strength and enemies and dilemmas? And fourth, think about those 3 million immigrants who were absorbed. Think about the Eastern European immigrants of the first and second and third Aliyah who established the state. Think of the 850,000 Jews who came from Muslim and Arab countries. Not one of them grew up in a healthy, democratic society. The number of American immigrants, Olim, has been very, very small. British, quite small. How could it be that nevertheless, without that deep democratic political culture, lowercase d, in so many of the countries of origin, that we've been able to create this democracy? And you know, Israelis love democracy so much that we voted once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times in 3 years. And it continues. You know, you may have noticed that in the United States of America today, there are issues and debates and concerns about where the democracy is going. And we have parallel but not equal debate, different kind of debate, because we're siblings but not twins in Israel. And I had the privilege of sitting down with President Herzog a few weeks ago. And in preparation for the meeting, I read about the crisis in America. And I read the works of Parker Palmer, an educational sociologist, who's written a book called Habits of the Heart. And he takes that beautiful phrase of Alexis de Tocqueville, habits of the heart. Because in the 19th century, when that French philosopher and wanderer comes to the United States of America, he doesn't judge America by the quality of its leaders. He doesn't judge America necessarily by all the corruption that went on election after election. He judges it by the habits of the heart. Do people care about one another? Do people talk to one another? Do people yell and scream at one another? Are people engaged? They feel connected. And we in Israel still pass those tests. We still have that resilience. Just Sunday night, I came from a visit to my daughter's intelligence base. I have 4 children, 2 are out of the Army, 2 are in the Army, 1 is a commando, and 1 is in intelligence, so I always say I'm not allowed to ask what my daughter does, and I don't want to know what my son does. We'll talk about that in group therapy later. And they had us all at the base. And, you know, in Israel, we all wear our identities, not just on our kippot, but on our sleeves and in the way we dress. And I was in the Republic of Tel Aviv. All the parents were super-duper Tel Avivi. And I knew that if I had done a survey, many of them would have been at the rally. And everybody's now using the word, the rally, in Tel Aviv the night before. And I knew that if I had asked, most of them say, I hate Bibi Netanyahu, and I hate what's going on, and I'm against the reforms. But when we walked in, and we saw our kids, we were united. When we walked in and heard this amazing statistic that 77% of the people in intelligence are 23 and under. And they meet with people from the NSA and the CIA one-on-one. We were able to put our enmity aside and remember, we are one. Am Yisrael Chai. And 5th, look at the culture that's been created. That dynamic culture that's now being exported to all corners of the world. Who the heck understands shtisel? And how did it become so popular? We'll talk about that in group therapy too. But we've created this amazing secular religious world. Do you know that at the rally, the first rally, it started raining, and they opened up umbrellas and they started singing Ma Tovu Ohalecha, right? The tents of Jacob opened up. The language of Israel, the cultural language of Israel, the cultural language of protest sometimes even, is Hebrew and Jewish. And that miracle of reviving the Hebrew language as the key to reviving our pride and our power and our culture. And so Eliezer ben Yehuda, in all his crazy creativity, said, oh, the phone, we should call that the Sachrachok, the far talker. I challenge you, go to Israel, and I hope you do come to Israel and ask somebody for the Sachrachok. No, it's the Pelephone, the miracle phone. And my personal favorite, because I'm a low-class kid from Queens, so what do I love? Pigs in blankets. What do we call them? Moshe B'Teva, Moses in the basket. And what traumatized my daughter? Cotton candy, Serot Safta, grandma's hair. And the 7th historic revolution, the new Jew. What I call the big Jewish sort is, think of the Jewish map 100 years ago in Russia, in Morocco, in Syria, in Europe. And the map today is Israel and the United States as the 2 powerful countries and 2 powerful Jewish communities working together, creating the new Jew. Part of the reason why we have a spring in our step, part of the reason why we have these kind of JCCs is because we have had a revolution in Jewish understanding of who we are, of Jewish self-image, thanks to Israel, thanks to the soldiers, thanks to Chalutziyut, the pioneering. You were pioneers too. But I'm not just here to sing a happy song. We're looking to the future. And so for each of these 7 opportunities or achievements, we also have 7 challenges. 1, keeping Israel safe. We're still on the chopping block. We're still in the enemy's crosshairs. 2, while we are so proud of the integration we have done and know also some of the failures we had, we have to figure out how do we continue to create a society which has a strong sense of solidarity, a strong sense of connectedness, but also respects the different tribes of Israel. 3, power has its challenges. Michael Oren, the former ambassador of Israel to the United States, says, oh, everybody talks about being a Herzl Zionist. Im tirtzu ein zo agada, if you will, it is no dream. He says, I'm a Delmore Schwartzian Zionist. Delmore Schwartz was a beat poet who said, in dreams begin responsibility. Wow. Zionism is about taking responsibility, about wielding power, and sometimes failing, but more often than not getting it right. And 4, I know this hasn't been a big issue in the news, but balancing Jewish and democratic, but also understanding it's not Jewish versus democratic. Where does democracy come from, I ask my students? We all in American history always give the credit to the Greeks. But the notion of tselem Elokim, of being created in God's image, which means that each of us have inherent value, equality, dignity, rights, comes from the Bible. And yes, when I see 600,000 ultra-Orthodox Haredim protesting against the draft, I might disagree with them, but they are using their democratic power. And we have to figure out how to make sure that the Republic of Tel Aviv has a 70% voting rate, just like many other parts of Israel. And when we talk about the cultural challenge, we talk about the balance between us and I, between the we and the ani. This is the great challenge in the Western world. And sixth, I'm so proud of the Hebrew Revolution, but I want to make sure that my Israeli Arab brothers and sisters also have a place at the table. I want to make sure that we have a very strong majority culture and a culture that respects minorities. And finally, will you come in? We have to have what I call 360, 365. I know Zach with his Z3, so I have to throw in some numbers. What is 360, 365? 360 degrees. Looking all around Israel, not just zeroing in on what CNN wants to think about, what Thomas Friedman wants to think about, and understanding the power of Jewish identity. And 365, it's every day that we have that. And to be wary that we don't allow the agenda to just become Israel advocacy. I'm so tired of that. Israel doesn't need a defense. Israel doesn't need a defense attorney. Israel needs thoughtful, creative, constructive, proud, critical patriots. And that's who we are, here and there, on both sides of the Atlantic, working together to make it a better place. And I don't understand somebody who would neutralize one of the most powerful Jewish identity tools of this generation, our love of Israel, by washing their hands of it. And so, to finish, you have your homework. You have your challenge. You have your mission. Not to turn away, but to double down. And just to let us thinking about that, I just have a whole list of what we should be doing to build up to celebrate the 75th. One, I'm old enough that I remember the pits of despair of America in the 1970s. And Gerald Ford and CBS TV launched an initiative called Bicentennial Minutes. How come Hollywood and how come you aren't creating 75 snippets of great heroes, great moments, so we can learn about Israel? Two, we need to have more Zionist salons talking about what Israel means and what the Zionist ideas are, because democracy begins in conversation. That's Thomas Dewey. But we know Jewish identity begins in disputation. And I'm not afraid. And we have to remember what I like to call the Kochian rabbi, Ed Koch, the great mayor of New York, who said, if you agree with me on 7 of 12 things, please vote for me. If you agree with me on 12 of 12 things, please see a psychiatrist. We need to agree, and we need to agree to disagree. And as I said earlier, the celebration should emphasize the values that we appreciate. Celebration and cerebration aren't opposite, they can go hand in hand. We think together, we criticize lovingly and thoughtfully and constructively. And let's my people sing and dance and watch and eat. Bring that culture alive. That's so important to you in your movement. And yes, I like to tell people, especially in the Northeast, 2 DW equal 1 IL. 2 Disney World trips for the family equals 1 Israel trip for the family. Skip a year at Disney World, skip a year at the Caribbean, and come home. Have a positive, constructive mission. And I think we want to introduce our young people to what I call Druze albums or Israel albums. Let them make an album of their own personal journey, their own personal understanding of Jerusalem or Israel. And you know, during COVID, we had the Saturday Night Seder. Within 2 weeks, they put together that Schmaltz Fest, which got more than 1 million views. How come we're not working on that for the 75th? We have more than enough time. And finally, I want ice cream for breakfast throughout the Jewish world. I want our kids to wake up on that morning and understand that this is sweet, this is special, this is unique, this is memorable. We are so lucky to be living in this moment. Let's take full advantage of it. Thank you very much.
Test. Thank you very much for that. That was brilliant. But I have a question for you. And it was in the Mifgash forum agenda. What does the future hold for the Jewish state? Where do you think that the Jewish state is going, given the politics of that's taking place right now, given the Abraham Accords, given the state of Israeli Jewry, American Jewry? What's your prognosis?
So, I'm a historian. I always say it's hard enough to predict the past. I can't begin to predict the future. But I also like to talk about what I call the directional signals. Give Israel a driving test. And I say to my LGBTQ friends, I say to my Israeli Arab friends, I say to my left-wing friends or right-wing friends who are worried about where the state is, pick a year, any year of the 75. Would you rather be in Israel today, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, or 40 years ago? Don't just read the headlines. Look at the quality of life. Look at the rise of a middle-class civilization among Israeli Arabs. Look at the surprises we had during Corona. I wasn't surprised, but others weren't paying attention. The Israeli Arab population is about 20% of the Israeli population. 23% of our doctors and nurses. 45% of our pharmacists. You look, I was in the States a month ago and said, oh, you know, when I read about Israel, it just sounds to me like Iran and the modesty police. I said, lovingly, I sentence you to a walk on the Tel Aviv beach. And then let's talk about the modesty police. So I'm bullish, I'm optimistic. Think of the Abraham Accords. We added an S to the Arab-Israeli conflict. I call it the Arab-Israeli conflicts. Because we talk about the Arab-Israeli conflict, oh my goodness, we've been stuck in the same place for 75 years or a century. It's unending. It's never moving. But no, peace with Egypt, peace with Jordan, peace with the UAE, ties now with Saudi Arabia, it's going in the right direction. And so what I think we have to do is I think we have to leverage, because you know what the biggest thing that scares me in America and Israel right now is despair. I don't understand how democracies heal without hope. I don't understand progressives who don't believe in progress and conservatives who don't conserve institutions. But we'll talk about that really in group therapy later. But what is it? We need that leap of hope. That's what Theodore Herzl gave us. Theodore Herzl gave us at a moment of despair, not a leap of faith, which we had and we still need, but a leap of hope. So I'm seeing on the whole, good. And you know that makes me very unpopular.
On the contrary, at my JCC, when we created the Center for Israel, people asked why. And we said that because Israel is stronger when you have a strong American Jewry behind it and a strong American population behind it. And American Jewry is stronger when Israel is strong. But there is a sense, or there's a question, as to what the role of American Jewry is in relation to Israel. Are we just cheerleaders? Are we just, everything is a kumbaya moment? When we see that the enemy is not necessarily external, but it's actually us collapsing on top of ourselves. What's the role of American Jewry in that regard?
As you'll learn from the book we were kind enough to purchase, Never Alone, one of the great lessons of Natan Sharansky's life is that even at the height of the Soviet Jewish movement, when he finally was able to get a document and pass it on to one Soviet Jewish activist, he had to find another Soviet Jewish activist, because even though they both had offices on Fifth Avenue, they were from competing organizations. Now you can look at that as a mark of weakness or a mark of strength. And I think, people like to talk about diversity in the United States of America, but it's not often diversity of opinion. We have to lean into diversity of opinion. And so some of the disputes that are happening now make me sick. And I get on the Jerusalem Post website or the Idiot website and I see some of my leaders, some of my cabinet members spewing garbage, and I don't want to get too political or partisan. I guess I just did, and I'm embarrassed. And sometimes it is about a disrespect for American Jewry, for my people, for my friends, for my brothers and sisters. But I want us to learn from our young people. I know we always like to yell and scream about the 10% or the 15% who knock on Israel. Look at the numbers of Birthright Israel. The 85% who report that they're able to come and see past the Kotel crisis and see the Kotel, the Western Wall, as the most inspiring site in their Jewish pilgrimage, who see it as who see that visit as a spiritual highlight of their lives. We should learn from them. And we should learn from the Israeli Mifgash, the 6 or 7 Israeli soldiers who are on each Birthright bus. And when you see them talking to one another, first of all, they have a common language that we didn't have in our generation when we first met Israelis in the 70s and 80s. They were foreigners, they were weirdos, and we were to them. But now there's a common language. So yes, I see the points of tension, and I also see opportunities for us to learn about one another. For example, look at you people, the money that you raise, the JCCs that you build. When I explain to young Israelis that every single American Jewish institution is from the generosity and vision of people like you and donors like yours, they don't believe me, because it all comes from the government there. So Israel has to learn, for example, about the culture of tzedakah. There's a lot of There's a lot of personal stuff on Israel, but not a lot of philanthropy. And so there are things for us to learn from one another while we're yelling and screaming at one another.
Right, but you can vote. And obviously those votes have not done very well as far as the majority of American Jewry is concerned. What voice does American Jewry have in order for Israel to see the impact that it can have on what's taking place in our society? Does Israel have any clue in terms of what our college students are going through? Does Israel have any clue in terms of the rise of anti-Semitism in this country? Does Israel have any clue in terms of what it is that we face as American Jews when Israel decides for itself what is best in its own interest? Are we part of those interests?
So first of all, I just beg to disagree. We just had a government for a year and a half that I actually thought was a really fascinating experiment in
Me
democratic
too.
governance.
What happened?
So the shift of 10,000 votes would have been a very, very different story. So we have to, when we talk about Israel, we talk about many different kinds of Israels. And yes, there is a problem. Look, when 3 elections ago, there was a poll that said, that asked Israelis, is it important for you that the prime minister of the state of Israel, the potential prime minister, care about diaspora Jewry? Over 70% said yes. But when they go into the voting booth, are they voting about diaspora Jewry? No, they're voting about economy, they're voting about tribalism, they're voting about pro-Bibi, anti-Bibi, they're voting about security, and it gets further and further down the list. Similarly, you ask most American Jews, look at the Gallup polls or the Pew study, 85% of American Jews love Israel. But when most American Jews enter into the voting booths, they're thinking about abortion, they're thinking about Trump, they're thinking about Biden, they're thinking about domestic issues. So we have to be able to kind of lean into where we can have things in concert and also acknowledge that we are, as I said, siblings, not twins. And we also need to have a better dialogue. So again, one of the things that Natan and I called for is a parliament of the Jewish people. Not one which is arrogant enough to say that somebody from Ukraine or from UK or from America should vote on issues, but just as the Knesset goes for advice, what are the legal implications of this particular piece of legislation? What are the economic implications of this particular piece of legislation? Why don't we talk about diaspora impact statements, like we have environmental impact statements? And before the vote, let a parliament of the Jewish people say, you know what, this is going to be trouble for us. And at least then people in the diaspora wouldn't feel so frustrated. They feel like we had a voice. Even if you lose the vote, you at least had a place at the table. We all need a place at the table because we are one family, one community, and the only way to do that is continue to sit together, even if we end up yelling and screaming at one another.
Fundamentally, I believe that the message that you project that most resonates is that no matter what happens, you have to be engaged. No matter what happens, you have to learn and you have to be involved. No matter what happens, you have to stay connected. But part of the problem is that when Israel gets translated by the New York Times or other papers around the country, we're getting a two-dimensional view. I don't mean to digress because I know this is about the 75th anniversary and we should all be figuring out how to celebrate it. But can you give some sort of an explanation to us about what's happening right now with regard to the judiciary, with regard to the supposed right wing of Israel that is changing the nature of the government? Can you just define it so that we understand it a little bit better?
So before I do that, let me reinforce what you're saying, which is our connection to Israel should not always be on probation. And our connection to the Jewish people should not always be on probation. And this constant, oh, did Israel make me feel good or bad today? Did American Jewry make me feel good or bad today is toxic. And that's not what patriotism is. To me, patriotism is learning to love your country even when you hate its government. Learning to double down and roll up our sleeves and change things if it's not going the right way. And I think actually that's something that American Jews could learn from Israel. Israelis, partially because they serve in the army and they're a community of us, for all the yelling and screaming right now, are still engaged. And by the way, in America, wearing my American history hat, I call this the Trump-opportunity. All those American Jews and Americans who hated Donald Trump didn't move to Israel. And I checked, I literally called the Canadian embassy. There's no surge in visas going to Canada. They understood that if I am unhappy with the current regime, and this is true for people who dislike Biden, I'm not making a political statement, I double down and I try to make a difference. Now what's happening right now, I think let's divide it on three levels. One, we really don't know, and I still don't know, which Bibi Netanyahu has showed up for work. He proudly moved back into Balfour. And is it a Bibi who is playing for history, who is thinking about the Jewish world, who's thinking about the Saudi Arabia and Iran. Tomorrow I have a column saying to Bibi, what about Iran? This has been the thing you've been pushing, yelling, and screaming about, and now you're going to have the country divided and so distracted when we should all, every time you meet with the American ambassador, every time you meet with Jake Sullivan, every time you meet with the Biden administration, you should be talking Iran, Iran, Iran. How do we push the advantage? Because imagine a world without the Iranian regime and with the Iranian people and the Iranian women being the victors over their oppressors. What a different world. So don't get distracted. So literally no one knows, and everybody has different, it's like reading the Kremlin in the old days, not that I'm comparing, right? Everybody has different theories about who the Bibi is that's shown up. And what power does he have vis-a-vis his junior cabinet ministers? Second, and this is not going to be popular, speak to many Israelis, many Israeli lawyers, and they say there is a problem with the judiciary. There is a problem with a Supreme Court that's too powerful. Americans wouldn't understand that idea.
Activist.
But, right,
No, they would.
right, too activist, right? That's too, I know, I'm joking, right? It's actually quite ironic that American liberals are saying we need a weaker court, and American Jews are saying, wait a minute, but Israel needs a stronger court. Why? Because we're in this ongoing dance between majority rule and minority rights. And it's complicated. I wish when the president of the Supreme Court, Esther Hugh, last week had spoken, instead of saying democracy is going up in flames on the 75th anniversary, I wish she'd said, you know what? I hear that there are some issues. Let me lean into some of those issues, and let's create a process. And the third thing is you have a small group of people who are leveraging their power in the most aggressive way, led by the justice minister, playing off of some of the other ministers, who are now pushing something they've been waiting for a really long time. And I think the most important message from the Israeli street is slow down. And just today we heard that there's a conversation now with President Herzog, who I think is a critical player in this story, about maybe we create some kind of presidential commission. Wearing my American history hat, it's very important that we distinguish between what we would call constitutional change, and we can call in Israel constitutive change, and policy. And that's getting confused, and that's one of the things we need to just sort of slow things down. We need maybe a council of elders, including some Shas rabbis, including some right-wingers, like Daniel Friedman, the former justice minister, who was very critical of the court, but is also saying, whoa, slow down. You don't change democratic rules overnight with a majority of 64. And you know what? It's short-term thinking, because what happens tomorrow when a majority on the other side comes? They'll undo everything. We need to have organic change. And we need to slow down. Bibi Netanyahu, I'm sorry to say, and I don't want to get too political, is not calming the society down. And that's his job as leader.
We have a limited period of time, so if anybody has any comments or questions, I'd like you to keep them brief. But I want to also focus on any questions you might have for Professor Gill, but also about what you might be thinking about in terms of the celebration of Israel, even during these stressful times. I don't know if anybody read there are microphones, by the way, there and there for anybody that wants to ask for them. I don't know if anybody read Bret Stephens in the New York Times, but he wrote this op-ed piece that was very interesting. He said, for those people that fear for Israel's democracy going down the tubes, 11% of the Israeli electorate voted for the radical right. 41% in France voted for the radical right. And in this country, I don't even want to go there. Again, part of what it is that we must have is a certain amount of perspective. Part of what it is that we must have is a certain amount of education about what's actually taking place. But the other part of it is that Israel, on some level, in some way, has got to recognize what the effect is on the diaspora, and certainly on a community like the American Jewish community. Does anybody have anything that they would like to comment on or question?
Hello. The war in Ukraine. Israel is in a very interesting position, right? Netanyahu has good relations with Putin. They're sitting Russia right in Syria. How do you see, it's been very quiet about it. Well, what is your perspective, again, on the way Israel is behaving during this war on the relationship with the diaspora community?
First of all, one of the things I love about my little world in Israel is that on Friday I jogged with a friend of mine who's extremely left. On Shabbat I davened with a group of people who are crazy right. And on Motzei Shabbat, I hosted somebody who was on her way to the demonstration at the president's house. And we're still in dialogue. And I have Israeli friends who think that Israel has played it very cleverly by taking a low profile, because what they care most about is having the IDF and the Israeli Air Force be able to do what it does in Syria. And the Russians are very clever. They let the Iranians send weapons, they let the Israelis destroy the weapons, and then the Iranians come and buy more weapons from Russia. So it's a whole game. But my friend, and I hate to keep on mentioning him, but we're constantly in conversation, Natan Sharansky says that he has never been more disappointed in the Jewish state. He's not going away. He's not washing his hands. He's not giving up. But as someone who thinks that there's a clear red line between the free world and Putin, and especially now that Putin and Iran are in cahoots, he doesn't understand the argument, we need power in Syria. He said in 1967, when Russia was much more powerful and Israel was much weaker, we were willing to take on Syria and take on Russia. Why don't we do that now? And so I feel obligated to give his moral voice on this issue and his deep disappointment, and also point out that others are saying, no, we've got to be more pragmatic. It is a complicated situation, but at the end of the day, I worry more about our soul. And so I'd rather us err on the side of being with the free world, being on the right side of history, and not being on the wrong side of history.
I believe there was a famous author that wanted to ask a question in the back of the room.
Thanks, David. Yeah, sure. Okay. Hey, Gil,
And
it's
a
Zach.
numerological expert.
Great to see you. Thanks again for all that you do, for being here, for once again throwing out one of my favorite terms that you coined, Trumpertunity. I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to ask you a question that I get asked a lot. We here run JCCs. We run Jewish camps. One of our tasks is to be the living room for the entire Jewish community. And the question I'm often asked is, where do you want a big tent? You want everyone to come in the living room, but do you? How wide are the tent poles? Who's in and who's out? Are we in a place to draw those lines? And where would you personally help guide us to drawing some of those lines today when it's very tricky?
Thanks for that question, and thanks for all that you do. I think we have a tendency sometimes to focus too much on the margins and not enough on the center. And I think it's more important, and this is, I was in the gym this morning, and everybody was like doing their thing. I just wanted to yell out, Am Yisrael Chai. It was kind of cool. Everybody was, sort of sweating together, right? And there's that internal core. We focus so much on where does Peter Beinart fit into the conversation. We give so much space to the small minority, and I'm talking about it because I watch the Pew studies, I look at the birthright studies, I look at what's going on. We've given them way more attention than they deserve. So I think the living room of the Jewish people is the heart of the Jewish consensus, and the heart of the Jewish consensus since the Shoah, and since 1948, and particularly since 1967, is that Zionism and Judaism and Israel are intertwined. And that is the consensus, and that is the consensus that we celebrate. And so, no, I was told that there are certain Hillels who have taken down their Israeli flags, and I think they're, some of them in your neck of the woods, and I think they are violating that core consensus of the Jewish people, and they're telegraphing weakness. And they're telegraphing division. And I always err on the side of not getting hysterical about anti-Semitism. Similarly, I always err on the side of trying to bring more and more people into the tent. But when we have Jewish studies professors and Israel studies professors and rabbis who use phrases like Jewish supremacy, that's a phrase straight out of the Nazi handbook. And I say, why not just, speak in the original German? And you're not smart enough, you're not creative enough to use a different set of ideas to take the same critical approach you want to take toward the settlements, but not impose your Western imperialist perspective, which treats Israel and Judaism in Western terms and not in Israeli organic terms? How dare you? So yes, I wouldn't encourage the JCCs to start inviting what I call the un-Jews, the people who are trying to undo the core Jewish consensus. Because I think we need to have a consensus conversation. And yes, I would keep the fights as much as possible out. And what I was trying to do with these ideas is these are ideas that should be able to transcend the politics of the moment and get us thinking about the opportunities of a lifetime. And I don't understand why we allow the bashers or firsters to hijack the agenda. I don't understand why we allow our despair to stop us from being the people of hope. But maybe I'm not smart enough.
Any other questions?
Hi, I'm Marcel from Hungary. What do you think about the debate about Jewish identity in terms of religious and secular Judaism? I think this is one of the defining debates in our time, and some people say that if there will be no Arab-Israeli conflict, then the conflict between religious and secular Israel would tear the country apart. And we also live in countries, also in Hungary, where we have to fight this debate and fight for our own identities, those people who are not religious, and many JCCs actually are standing up for people who live a Jewish life which is not religious. How much do you think it's a more important debate and question, and to arrive to a consensus in that as faced to the Arab and Israeli conflict or politics in Israel?
I think this is where we really see the power of the JCC movement. You are the peoplehood people of the Jewish people. You are the people who understand that Judaism is not just a religion or just a people, but we're both. And do Jews confuse? Yes, we don't fit into the traditional Western Christian categories. And I say this with love for the West and love for my Christian brothers and sisters. Anybody ever celebrate a Passover Seder? Is it a national moment or a religious moment? The answer is yes, both. The Kotel, the Western Wall, is it a national moment or a national symbol or a religious symbol? The answer is yes, both. And there are those people, and again, it's a small minority and a very aggressive minority, who are trying to run the conversation, who are trying to define Israel. Now think about what was the Zionist revolution all about. The Zionist revolution was all about going against the passivity of the rabbis and against the messianism of the rabbis to bring it back. But we had people like Rav Kook, who when the Chalutzim, when the pioneers came, and people saying, oh, look at those goyim, look at those non-Jews, those un-Jewish Jews who are taking their kippot off and eating ham sandwiches on Yom Kippur, which show they're still in rebellion. The late Rabbi David Hartman said that it looked like they were in rebellion, but like that they were that teenage kid who said, I'm leaving, I'm running away from home, Mom, and they ran back to the Jewish people, they ran back to the Jewish land, they ran back to the Jewish language. And so we need to emphasize, we need to tell the story more of the bridge builders, not the barn burners. And unfortunately, and this goes back to David, your very important question about who showed up to, who's minding the store. All too often, right now, this government is playing with the barn burners and not the bridge burners, not the bridge builders. But they're playing with fire. And we've seen a cost in terms of relations with the Biden administration. We've seen a cost in terms of relationship with the diaspora jury. We've seen a cost in terms of a visit that was canceled at the UAE. And maybe, with enough pushback, there'll be the balance. So that's one half of the answer. The other half of the answer is that when I walk around Jerusalem on a Friday afternoon, or Tel Aviv on a Friday afternoon, and it's quiet, and my Israeli Arab brothers and sisters are celebrating their holy day, and my Jewish brothers and sisters are getting ready for our day of rest. There's no law mandating minucha, rest period, on Friday afternoon. It's in the culture. And so I think while we definitely have challenges, and there's a question about how we make sure that we bring the Haredi community, the ultra-Orthodox community, to the 20th century, let alone the 21st century, and how we make sure that not every conversation about Jewish and democratic is Jewish first democratic. I also think there are certain, what I call the sinews of society, the underlying things beyond the superficial. Give Israeli society an X-ray, and we dance at each other's weddings. Haredim and Chilonim. And Merav Michaeli, the great left-wing leader, showed up at a Haredi wedding just a couple of weeks ago of Gafni, who's a Haredi leader, Yaakov Gafni. That's what doesn't make the headlines. And that's what I think is going to determine our future.
I think there are a couple of bottom lines here, and that is that Israel and the Jewish people have actually never been united. We have always had different opinions, and we always found a way to bridge them. And that while Israel is going through the stress it's going through, and while we are also living in a divided society ourselves, we still have an obligation to be grounded in what's most important to us as Jews and to Israel as our homeland. Before we close, we have time for just one more question if anybody wants to pose a question or make a comment. Okay.
Let me, if I could just sum up?
You can sum up, but I'm getting the last word.
Okay, fine. I call this identity Zionism. Theodor Herzl was all about political Zionism. That's what we needed. The emergency was to establish a state. But what's the emergency today in our kids' lives? Even with all the problems of anti-Semitism, Thank God we have leadership, we have presidents and politicians and police who fight anti-Semitism. What I worry about is our kids' souls. I worry about their identities. I worry about what Emile Durkheim, the great sociologist, called anomie, how the forces of industrial society and modernization strip our kids of connection. And identity Zionism says that's the central issue. Who am I? Who am I going to be? Too many grown-ups in this world, my wife thinks it's unsophisticated when I call them grown-ups, which is us. Ask kids, what are you going to be when you grow up? Which means how much money are you going to make? And how are you going to afford the big fancy house in Buckhead? I ask them, what about your souls? Who do you really want to be? And I use Zionism as the most basic tool. It's utilitarian Zionism. It's a Zionism of identity which says this is an opportunity of a lifetime to ask big questions, to count not just in decades like I do as an American historian, or centuries when I visit England, but in millennia, and ask the big questions. And Alt Neuland, go back and learn who we were and where we've made mistakes, and go forward to create a new society and also a new Jew, and a happier Jew, and a more balanced Jew. I'm not arrogant enough to say it's the best way or the only way, but I'm lucky enough to say it's my way and our way. Why give it up? Thank you very much.
Just to close, we also have to struggle with how to talk to each other, how to argue with each other, how to figure things out together. A little while ago, I received a book by Robbie Greengrass and Abby Dober Stern, Stories for the Sake of Argument. It's well worth reading. A couple of points that came across. Be able to defend your arguments in a rational way, otherwise all you have is an opinion. 2, rather than fearing conflict, we have to find a way to use it as a catalyst for new thinking and for growth. And 3, a quote from Michelle Obama, let's invite one another in. Maybe then we can begin to fear less, to make fewer wrong assumptions, to let go of the biases and stereotypes that unnecessarily divide us. You have given us a way to unite us. I want to thank you very much for your talk and for having the privilege of being before you.